could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky.
Hi all, and happy Thursday. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the PetsApp webinar series. A super special one planned for you this evening. We're welcoming not one, not two, not even three. We're welcoming 4 experts from around the veterinary world to speak tonight on the topic of new clinics. As PetsApp, we're super excited to be hosting this, as we believe naturally that we're the perfect partner for new to market clinics and those looking to extend their existing services. As an all-in-one communications platform for clinics, we've seen some super smart veterinary teams utilize the power of PetsApp to onboard new pet owners at a really quick pace. It's been super exciting. Really excited to be offering this webinar alongside some fantastic resources and courses from our friends at Vet Dynamics and OnSwitch too. Anyway, enough from me. Let's move on to the meat of the bones and introduce tonight's chair. I'm sure most of you know Andrew, but for those who are uninitiated, after a storied career as a qualified vet from the Bristol Vet School, he's been at Grampian Pharmaceuticals, Bayer Animal Health. Andrew Curwen joined XLVets in 2006, which is a collaborative community of independently owned veterinary practices committed to working together to share knowledge, skills, and resources. Andrew, how are you doing this evening?
Very good indeed, Lewis. Thank you for that introduction.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you and the rest of our panelists. Before we get on with everything, attendees, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box below. Our panel will get to them. If you have a particular meaty point that you'd like to chat through with our panel, you can also at the end of our panel use the raise your hand function where you can be on live chatting with our panelists. Anyway, that's enough from me. Andrew, over to you.
Lewis, thank you so much indeed. So it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. It's this evening if you're listening live, and it's sometime in the future if you're watching on demand. I'd like to warmly introduce, firstly, our panel. So Melanie joins us from Vet Assist, a business specialising and seeking to help vet practice development and design. Kate is a solicitor from Rudlings Wakelam. I'm sorry, Kate, for some reason I struggle with that name. I want to say Rudlings Wakelam for some reason, I'm sorry. And will certainly, I'm sure, contribute to questions that you might have of a legal nature in particular. And Simon is with the Accountants Moore Scarrett, an accountancy business very familiar in the veterinary world. So a warm welcome to Melanie and to Kate and to Simon. Also a very warm welcome to everybody listening in now live. Please make this your event, so do contribute. We've got a chat function that you can use, but specifically for questions, please use the Q&A box. And we'll hopefully you'll all be able to see the questions that are being posed. We'll endeavour to address as many of the questions as we possibly can. And I think also a warm welcome to anyone who's watching on demand. Clearly, we're not going to be able to answer your questions in the past, but we can in the future. And all of us are contactable by email and other methods of electronic communication. So if you're watching on demand and you've got questions, we'd still love to be hearing them as well. So Melanie, Simon and Kate, if we can ask you to unmute, and while we do that, just a word to everybody that we have a Mentimeter system here. Ricky, I wonder if you could put that slide up so everyone can see that. If you've got a smartphone, you can put your camera up to that QR code and it should take you to Mentimeter. Or alternatively, you can go to your web browser and type in menti.com. You'll need to then enter the code 76779697, and that'll allow you in a few moments' time just to start entering some feedback to us. So I wonder if we could start by just asking our panelists, what do they think is important for a practice setting up? Melanie, can I come to you first with that one?
Sure, Andrew. Hi, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here. As Andrew said, I'm looking forward to it being an interactive session, so please ask any questions. Basically, I suppose when you're looking at setting up practice, I like to break it down and try and keep it as simple as possible. So I think there's 6 kind of critical areas you need to consider. And I always kind of say to myself, it's the 6 Ps that you need to think about. So first one would be purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? And this is really important. So what's your own mission statement? Why are you doing it? Because this is very important for you as a leader and how you're going to lead your team. The second would be your premises, which is always a strong one with me. So is the premises you're looking for fit for purpose? So that's a really, really important one. The third one would be personnel, and that's obviously your team first and foremost. So who do you need in your team? Is it the vets, nurses, support staff, but also outside personnel, so professionals, so the likes of Simon and Kate. So a really, really good accountant to help guide you through the minefield that's ahead of you, and make it a lot easier. And the same important to get that right. Oh,
Melanie, we lost you briefly there. So we got to the third P of personnel, but I don't think we reached the fourth one.
Okay, we have practice management system. That's my 4th P.
Brilliant,
my 6 Ps. So the PMS system is really, really important to make sure that you've got a good veterinary management system that'll do both your clinical work, but also your business as well. So it'll, get your KPIs and you can track your business progression. The 5th one then would be pricing. So ensure that you've got your pricing correct. That's a really important one. Obviously, you need the funds coming in to cover everything that you're doing. So think about your pricing very carefully. And then last but not least would be your protocols for the practice. And again, this comes down to leadership as well. So how are you going to lead the practice? So by giving systems and putting systems and protocols in place, I think that's a really important one. They would be my 6 key areas of consideration when setting up.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Really, that's great to hear. So I hope people have had a chance to get onto the Mentimeter. And Ricky, are you able to put the first question up, which we were going to ask people, just thinking about how they would feel about opening up a new practice? We'd just like to get your feedback in terms of your level of confidence. So there should be a question there that will allow you to sort of enter a sliding scale. And I think you can probably see it bouncing around as people put their scores in. The further you drag it to the right, the more confident you are. The further to the left, the less confident you are. And we'll set a little objective, I think, from this evening's session to see if we can help shift that level of confidence in a positive direction. So we'll just let people add that in. And in fact, we can leave that running and close that out in just a moment. Melanie, you talked really importantly there about the need for personnel inside and external. And so, Kate, in terms of external, the legalities, what sort of preparations would you be encouraging people to be thinking about in starting a new practice?
I think one of the most important elements to consider when starting a practice is the structure. So how do you want to be carrying out your business? A lot of the formalities like properties, your employees, your contracts, they can all come once you've kind of hit the ground running. But I think a lot of people overlook how their business is going to be structured. So, and I'm sure Simon and Melanie would be able to kind of touch on this as well from their advising perspectives. But from a legal point of view, you have obviously your limited companies, you have your limited liability partnerships or your sole traders, which sounds like a bunch of waffle, but they each have their own positives dependent on each individual case. So each vet's circumstances may suit a particular type of structure. And I think if you can sit down with an advisor and kind of say, this is what I want, this is what I'm hoping for, this is what I have planned so far, your advisor can kind of say, well, based on what you've given me, I think this route is the best for you and here's why. And I think if you have a good structure to start off with, you avoid a lot of hiccups and a lot of mistakes and a lot of kind of those teething stages when you first open a practice. A lot of them can be avoided because you're already set up with a level of knowledge, a level of business knowledge, which a lot of other counterparts may not have thought about. I think a lot of when you open up a business, you just want to get going, you just want to get in, you want to get your employees in, you want to start marketing, and a lot of the boring kind of business elements get overlooked. So kind of sitting down and going right back to the basis and say, how do I want to carry out my business? Who do I want to be the legal entity? It's just such a good way to kind of set a good foundation for what is hopefully a really successful business.
You remind me of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Success, when one of them is, begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
And Simon, I wonder, does that apply really from the accountancy perspective as well, being clear about the end and then starting from a positive beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Kate said, you need to know where you want to get to and exactly what you want the practice to look like. People always will underestimate, to a certain extent, how much work is involved once you actually open the doors and you've got clients coming into the practice. So trying to do as much in advance as possible in the run-up to that, so that you've got a good grounding to keep you going from there. And it's not just the first 12 months, but it's actually saying, what am I going to need over the first 24, 36 months? And that can look at it from both the sort of, we'd be looking at the finances and the cash flow projections and that side of things, actually how much money do I need and what could it look like? But also trying to make sure you've got those marketing plans in place so that you can keep any early momentum rolling forward. You don't want to have something for the first 6 months and then immediately after that, actually, you're too busy with the day-to-day clinical work to then start a new marketing campaign. If you can get the bones of that together before you actually open the doors, you've then got something ready to sort of just update and then roll out to clients at set times in advance. And that can really help in keeping that early momentum with a new practice going so that you can carry on building for the future.
One of the things that you mentioned, Melanie, there about the personality inside and outside is, it strikes me that what we've heard is there's a balance there in opening a new business that's partly about the sort of raw entrepreneurial energy of, just make it happen, and partly a sort of the sensible energy of, okay, let's get things sorted and have structures in place. And I don't know, do the panel have views in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of being that single entrepreneur, or whether you would always favor someone to go into business with someone else to bring that sort of that sense of balance?
I think don't be afraid to look and outsource help in various different areas. I mean, we all need to know what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we need to work with those. So you look for that outside help, look for the assistance in helping you do and set up correctly. And that could be in the form of HR as well. So if you've never managed people before, and if you're very unsure as to what employment law is, and probably Kate can expand on this, but get somebody that you can outsource HR contracts now. It's not that you have to have a HR person in-house. You can outsource those sources. So look for those sources to help you. And I think if you do that at the start, that's a really good grounding for you. And I think that's going to help you succeed in your business.
I think quite often as well, with a lot of successful veterinary businesses that I've seen, generally, if you don't want to go in as a sole trader, and you want to go in as a partnership or a limited company, often there's one partner who's veterinary trained, and there's another partner who's, say, business trained, who has an accounting background or a legal background, or I should say a HR background, who can kind of offer a different perspective and a different set of skills that veterinary nurses or vets may not have. And it's not necessarily a sign of weakness, because often you find if a lot of vets go into one business together, they can often have conflicting views. And the phrase that 2 heads are better than one doesn't always necessarily apply when those 2 heads don't really understand what the issue is. Whereas if you have 2 different backgrounds, 2 different sets of skills, it can quite often help a business flourish, particularly in the early stages.
Absolutely. So the sense of creating a team around you which have complementary skills, which clearly are going to involve veterinary skills, but also other skills as well, and maybe just different views and perspectives of how to view the world. And I think critically, there's this point, isn't there, that actually they could be people who are shareholders in a limited company with you or limited liability partners with you in the business, but they can also be people who are external to the business as advisors, consultants, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think part of it is understanding what you don't know as much as what you do, and playing to your strengths to make sure that actually you're doing the things you know really well. And then if you don't know something, either investing the time to do so, but it might not be feasible. And then if it's not getting external help to do so, to actually bring that skill set to the business to help it flourish. If you're going into business with anyone, you need to make sure that you've got a common goal and that you're on the same wavelength. You don't want someone who's going to be pulling in completely different direction to where you want to take the practice. So having that common roadmap as to where you want to get to at the outset and making sure everyone's clear and going in the same direction is a massive help.
I make a point here at the risk of either embarrassing or upsetting a lot of people, but one of the things I notice is that if you're a member of the veterinary profession, you would look around that profession and you would recognize, maybe quietly to yourself, that that not all vets are necessarily the same. Perhaps if you're a vet and you have a dog, you might quietly say to yourself, well, I might be happy to take my dog to another vet, A, but maybe not another vet, B. And yet, as vets, we sometimes forget that lawyers and accountants and business consultants are also in that group as well, and that a lawyer is not a lawyer is not a lawyer type thing, and an accountant can be different. And so one of the pieces of advice I would give to anyone starting a new business is to get a really good team of people around you and recognize that they're not all the same. And they will, have their strengths and weaknesses from within their own abilities that are well worth exploring. Yeah, I think that probably also reminds me just to mention on the call now that we will endeavour to answer as many questions as we can. So please do stick them in the Q&A box or the chat box. But I think we need to, I think, just say that we can't be seen to be giving any specific advice, obviously on legal and accountancy grounds. Separately after the webinar, I'm sure Kate and Melanie and Simon would be happy to engage with you at an individual level to be able to give you specific answers, but we'll endeavour to answer questions as best we can. Simon, you just mentioned, I think, an important area there, which was, we don't know what we don't know. I wonder, sometimes you learn best from your disasters and mistakes, in a sense. Without wishing to name any names, I wonder, can any of you think of sort of mistakes that you have seen made, which have been really useful learning exercises? They may be from your own experiences or from other businesses that you've been involved with. Is there anything there that springs to mind?
I suppose maybe just from my perspective, if we're talking about practice design, I suppose I've probably seen a few over the years where practitioners maybe were very conservative in their initial plan when they were designing or planning their own premises, and just didn't think big enough, and quite quickly found themselves confined. So within maybe about 5 years of the business doing really, really well, suddenly found themselves quite confined with the premises they had, but because they were tied into a lease or just for various different reasons, they actually couldn't extend or do anything further with the premises. So that's probably an area, that's a really, really strong one that you should consider at the start as well. When you're looking for a premises, look for something that you can hopefully grow into. It may be that all the rooms aren't specific at the moment, but they're there. The likes of office space could be, planned for at the moment, and then later on turned into consulting space, for instance. But yeah, I think just maybe sometimes being very, very conservative at the start and not thinking, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And so, yeah, that's something I've probably seen.
I think we can all recall pretty much every practice expansion we've ever seen where people have said, we thought it was going to be too big and too huge, and 18 months later they're bursting at the seams and are now desperately trying to get planning permission for an extension.
I think following off the back of that, quite often you see, as you say, you're tied into these leases, and quite often I see this where luckily I have quite a few clients who are are very experienced, so they know if they see a 5-year lease on the front of it, you think 5 years. From a commercial perspective, 5 years isn't a particularly long lease, but if within a year that premises is now no longer suitable, you've got 4 years of rent to pay. So I think, as you say, when those very initial negotiations, you say, right, well, they've come to me with a 15-year lease. You may think that's extortionate, but you may say, right, well, we've got a plan in rent reviews that are going to come into that because your rent's going to go up. Do you have enough business capacity in the building to accommodate for that rent review? And then you have to think, oh, there's a landlord's break clause in there. They may be able to terminate the lease in 2 years. Would we have a potential backup if we were then kicked out of the property? So there's always kind of, as you say, right at the beginning, you think, oh, that's not going to be suitable for me now, or that is going to be suitable for me now. But in a year, 2 years, your circumstances could be totally different. And it's always essential to make sure that you have those options to change, to either make the property bigger or have something else available. Just always that safety net, so that if something happens that makes sure, for good reasons as well, if you outgrow your property, you have an avenue to turn down, so that you're not suddenly paying 2 lots of rent on 2 different buildings, which is very not ideal.
Yeah. I've seen some great examples in the past as well, where practices have sort of budded up with other partners, and then shared, a physical space, which has then given flexibility to maybe expand together, or if one needs a bit more and one needs a bit less, etc. So again, getting creative there, and in farm practice, the obvious one is to find a farmer that's got a barn that's ripe for a bit of conversion. But in small animal practice, there are other businesses that will really love to work alongside a veterinary practice, because it can often bring great kudos to them. So finding shared space to allow you to expand can be helpful. Yeah. Simon, have you got some thoughts on those things that you maybe have seen and you thought, gosh, that was a learning exercise?
I think one of the key things is having confidence around your pricing. It was one of the initial keys that Melanie put forward is the pricing structure. Is there's a tendency to look around at what others are charging and think, oh, I've got to be cheaper than them in order to get the client base in to start with. And there is an element of that, and sort of targeted discounts can work well to build a client base initially, but is actually valuing the service that's being provided and the client care and the focus that you can have on that, and actually making sure that the pricing is set at a sensible level. The number of clients that we pick up and we look at the pricing with them, and is actually quite a long way behind where the market is at the current point in time. And then they wonder why they can't afford to buy the new piece of kit they want to do to enhance their services or extend the practice. And they're really busy and rushed off their feet, but not making the money that they should be for the effort that's being put in. And a lot of the time it comes down to the prices that are being charged, and then making sure that everyone in the practice is actually applying them as well. Because you can have what's stated on a price list, but if nobody actually applies them, it doesn't mean anything to the clients. I think that's quite a key thing. And also on the personnel side of things, as the practice hopefully grows and you have to recruit and bring people in, you need those people to actually be on the same mission as you and want to buy into the growth of the practice. While you've got quite a small team initially, having one bad person in there can have a really destabilizing effect on how the practice can develop and really pull it back. So actually recruitment's one of the biggest things that is a challenge for new business owners, and making sure that you get that right so that you've got the right team members in to help you take it forward is always a challenge.
Yeah, I think you make lots of really great points there, and one of the things I hear you saying there is the ability to sort of say no is quite a useful thing. Saying no to a price structure that doesn't support a healthy future, saying no to team members that may not be a good fit. One of the practices within the XLVet community started as a de novo farm animal practice. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind me sharing with you that they sat there on their first day waiting for the phone to ring, and they decided that they were going to be a farm animal only practice, and the phone rang, and it was a lady who owned a horse, and she wondered if they would come and see the horse. And they had to bite themselves really hard to be able to say, no, we said we'd be a farm practice. And the lady was very disappointed that that they wouldn't come to see her horse, but, you know, she understood that's what it was. They felt awful that they had turned down their first client, or potentially, but everybody in the district heard that's what they'd done. And everybody in the district heard that this new practice had said no to a horse. Consequently, all the farmers realised that they must be specialists in farm animal to have said no to this first client. That practice is now a very, very large farm animal practice. So being able to say no, I think, at an early stage, probably really, really helpful. So yeah, interesting.
I think it can be quite daunting, particularly for new business owners, to say no, because they think, oh, I have this opportunity, it may never come around again. I have to say yes, I have to accommodate all of the things that are just being thrown at me. But often, you know, as Melanie and Simon and myself and Andrew have all said, that if you take a second, think about the long-term plan, think about how that decision will affect your business in, say, 2, 3, 5 years' time, it can actually be so much more beneficial to make those hard choices and say, actually, no, we're not going to go with this particular associate because we think they may be going in a different direction, or no, we're going to do this business, because it may be tough, but it'll be beneficial in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lovely metaphor of the plains of America, where the indigenous buffalo looked up to see the rain coming as it came over the mountain range, and they ran at it. Whereas the introduced domesticated cattle looked up and saw the rain coming, and they ran away from it. And of course, if you run at the rain, you run through it, and you don't get wet for very long. And if you run in the other direction, the rain catches up and it spends a long time raining on you as you're trying to run away from it, but it crosses over the top of you. So short-term pain for long-term gain is the old analogy, isn't it?
And I think there's also an element of you don't want to end up with all the clients that nobody else wants.
Yeah, it's a lovely practical statement, Melanie. Yeah. We've got some questions coming in, which is really great. And I wonder if we could turn and address some of them, if that's okay. The first one here is, how many years experience do you think you'd want as a vet before thinking about doing your own thing? What's your view on that?
I think it's down to each individual, and I think it's your own ambition and your own ability. I think that's a huge part of it. I don't think there is a time limit. I really don't think there is. I would say get as much experience as you possibly can. But I suppose doing your research and doing all your groundwork first. And like we've said so many times, just trying to get all the help on board that you can. I don't think there is a time limit. And that's certainly my opinion on it anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. In terms of the practices we see starting up, it very much comes down to the drive of the individuals and sort of what skill sets they've got. And if they're doing that as a group of individuals, have they got the skill sets across that group to actually open the practice, rather than thinking, oh, I haven't been qualified X number of years, I'm not in a position to start up my own practice. If you've got the ambition and the drive to do it, that's the main thing that you need. Yes, you need the clinical skills to go with it as well, but everyone develops at a different rate in all fields, and so you've got to have the ability that you can go in and do that work. But I don't think there's any sort of minimum time limit that you need to serve as an employee before you start looking at the options.
There's a reality as well that there are a bunch of older vets there who have sold up to corporates and may be twiddling their thumbs, wondering what their purpose in life is these days. And I don't doubt that there are certainly a number of mentors out in the profession there who would be quite prepared to support the next generation as well. Yeah, brilliant. Question coming up here, I think, Kate, perhaps for you to have a think about, really, which is, better to buy into an existing partnership, or, given current expectations about valuation, better to go greenfield? What's the right way to weigh those two up? How would you consider that one?
Yeah, so they each have their pros and cons. When you buy in, generally you don't have the element of control that you would if you were setting up your own practice. So when you set up your own practice, you can kind of take on the associates that or vets employees that you want. You may have a connection of people that you'd like to start up with. You have more control, whereas when you buy in, particularly if you're buying into a company, it's the ownership is dictated by the value of the shares. So you may be buying in for 5% of the shares. You still have some autonomy, but you're kind of guided by the existing people that are there already. When you buy in as well, you're also buying into the existing liabilities of a practice. So if there are debts that this current company has, which you become aware of during the due diligence process, you're therefore kind of taking on part responsibility for those debts or for those disputes or whatever it may be. Whereas when you're starting afresh, it's more difficult because you have to do the setup and there's a lot more paperwork to go through because the buy-in has already done all that. They've already been through the whole rigmarole of everything. But it's a clean slate. You don't have to worry about what predecessors have decided, what predecessors have put in place. And it may also be that they have all their contracts, they have all their leases are in place, everything looks okay, but it may be very outdated. So you're not always necessarily getting a brand spanking new business that's, got all its clients and it's all up to date and it's crossed all its T's and dotted all the I's. They may be falling behind on elements, which then you're taking on responsibility for. So I would always go with the startup, but not everybody has the skills or ability to do that. So the buy-ins can sometimes be a good way to get a bit of experience maybe before you start your own practice, or even to take over, look to take over eventually. But it does generally come down to the individual. And as I said, both have pros and cons.
Mm. Simon, would you add to that, or agree or disagree? We're a very agreeing panel this evening. I wonder if it's time we threw something in where we had a good disagreement, maybe.
I think in terms of the buy-in proposition, it very much comes down to what value is being put forward by the existing owners. Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of corporate activity in the marketplace. The valuations that come with that are quite high at the moment. And if the existing owners are expecting you to buy in at something akin to that sort of valuation, the likelihood is it's not going to make financial sense for you to do so. And you're probably not going to be able to borrow the money in the first instance to actually acquire part of the business as it currently stands. So that comes down to a value exercise as to actually what is being put forward to me. And there's a wide range on that valuation as to whether it's in line with the corporate valuations, and some practices have an approach and say, actually, we're not going to value the practice too highly because we want to retain people and keep them in the business, and that makes it a lot more appealing proposition for people to come in. That gives you a security of going into a known business, but you have to make sure you can get on with the existing partners and work with them, and that's sort of part and parcel of what you're buying into. As Kate said, you've got a say at the table rather than you controlling the entirety of the destiny of the practice. Whereas if you start up, you can put your own vision, your own stamp on there, and you can have control of it from the outset. The downside is you haven't got that shared responsibility of running the business and the skill sets and other experience that is there. So there's pros and cons to both. But it comes down to the individuals as to probably whether they want more security and support and they've got a decent financial offer that's there to come into a practice, or actually I've got a vision that I want to do something different on my own that I'm not going to be able to achieve in this existing business, and that would then lean towards the startup side of things.
I think in deference to our host tonight, PetsApp, we should probably try and stick to the topic of talking about sort of new enterprises as opposed to the buying in of into practice. Although maybe they'd like to run a webinar on that as well. We could contribute to. I think let's jump to a couple of other questions that I can see here, which are around software. And I'm going to give you all a gentle nudge that if you manage to mention the word PetsApp, you'll probably endear yourself to Lewis and the team. But thinking more broadly about software, let's include that to accountancy software. Let's include it to practice management software, Let's include it to HR software even, and legal software. What sort of softwares would you be encouraging practices to think about or be recommending?
I think there's a lot to actually take into consideration when you're trying to pick a good practice management system. As you alluded to, like definitely the clinical side of things. Obviously, you need to be able to write good histories. You know, it's good if it integrates with like your laboratory equipment, and then obviously from the business perspective, you know, can you actually, you know, is there a good tracking mechanism there for tracking your KPIs? Is there dashboards available to you so that, you know, to help you along the way? Because if you're not generally very business focused, well, then there's a lot of tools that can help you. And then ultimately as well, you know, I mentioned too, PetsApp, you know, will it integrate with the different digital platforms that are out there? Because, you know, we've spoken about, you know, designing your practice and starting up your practice, but maybe you're in a situation where you can't expand your practice. So if you can't expand your practice, where do you look at? Well, obviously digital. You know, this is the way forward. So if you are limited with the amount of consult rooms you have, well, you're not anymore, because you now have this digital platform that you can use. So I think from that perspective, it's vital what you choose in your VMS system, and you need to put a lot of thought and effort into it. And also species as well. You know, we've got different small animal, farm animal, equine. So you need to make sure that the package is actually going to deliver on the type of species that you're looking after as well. So they generally be the areas that I would always advise practitioners to look at when they're looking at a good VMS system.
Thank you, Melanie. Simon, have you got any thoughts on accountancy software?
Yeah, accountancy software and how that links in, I think it's comes down to ease of use and making everyone's life easier. You don't want something that's going to be too overly complicated or put extra hassle and stress into your life, when actually what you want to do is focus on running the practice. So keeping something that is easy to access, links into your bank account and tracks transactions, ideally links to your practice management system as well. That most of the sort of the mainstream accountancy software, so Sage, Xero, QuickBooks, have all got the ability to do that. But it's then getting it set up in the right way to make life as easy as possible for people, so that they're not wasting hours of their time putting in information into an accounting software. It's not a good use of any vet's time when they could be actually consulting in a theatre, doing marketing and development. That's their strong suit. Let's stick to that rather than spending a lot of time on there. Coming back to Melanie's points on the PMS and integrating with sort of other systems, I think that's quite key in future-proofing what you can do. Can you book your appointments? Can you take the payments from clients as well and have some sort of way of dealing with that online for card payments to help manage your bad debt position and make sure that you're actually collecting the cash in for all the work that you're doing. Most businesses fail because of cash flow rather than lack of profitability. So making sure you're getting paid for the work that you do as quickly as possible and making that as easy as possible for clients, that's part and parcel of the overall software system and what you can put in place to deal with that.
You make a really important point about cash flow there, don't you? For any new business, that cash flow matters so much, and attention to that is critical. Really decent, perfectly good businesses have failed as a result of just not getting cash flow sorted in the early stages, or even actually in the later stages of where big growth is occurring. Yeah. Kate, any thoughts about software and systems? I appreciate the legal profession like to do everything on sort of vellum and parchment, but
yeah, some title deeds are excruciatingly painful. Luckily, we're getting rid of those kind of decade by decade. We're shortening them down. I think from legal software, it isn't kind of, I don't think there's enough to put in to have a separate legal software system to integrate into a business, but there are elements of the legal paperwork which can easily be incorporated to a case management system. So things like making sure your data protection consents and all your that you're deleting unnecessary data. You, as a business, you have a responsibility to do it within a reasonable period of time of obtaining that consent or obtaining that data. And it's something that as a vet, you don't really want to think of. It's not, may not be within your skill set. You may be totally uninterested. I don't know many people who thrive when they hear the word data protection. So kind of having a system that sets up reminders to say, right, you need to go through your case management system and get rid of kind of data that you've been holding for an excessive period of time because it's not justified, and it's essentially a breach of the regulations. So little things like that. HR in particular, there are some HR advisors out there who do have packages who can just integrate it into your business so that when you take on an employee or you have pay reviews or kind of a bonus structure, or if you're making redundancies fairly soon on into starting your business, they make it simpler for you so that you're not spending ages trawling through meetings with lawyers. You can just simply go, right, here's my updated terms and conditions, here's how I need to implement them and make them, you know, kind of compliant in every way without the excessive time and the excessive expense. So it is something to consider. And unfortunately, so often people kind of think, oh, well, I'll get in first and then I'll deal with it. But as you know, Simon and Melanie will know, if you see a practice and you show an interest in it, there is actually a quite an extensive period of time before you actually purchase that practice, because there's a lot of steps and documents and due diligence that goes on. So that's the perfect time to be looking into case management systems, extra software packages that you could maybe add on, which will just make your life so much easier when you're so busy setting up the practice and trying to get clients and customers, that you know all of your paperwork's being dealt with electronically and straight away without you having to give much thought to it.
That's really helpful, and I think it just reiterates as well, doesn't it, the fact that other people have gone down these roads before, and there are a lot of people out there who will give their advice quite happily in all of these areas in terms of what they've found has worked well for them in terms of software or processes or HR or accountancy provisions. So anyone listening to this, you know, remember there are a lot of people out there who will happily share with you their advice. Couple of questions here. There's one question here which has come in on the chat function as well. Don't you agree that the time is now right for a purely independent telemedicine practice, especially for pregnant and child-raising vets, in a digital ecosystem without the whole infrastructure of a practice itself? There's a nice question to consider.
I think from just my experience personally, so many people are working from home now. So many people are kind of have been isolating, that doing more virtual elements and doing stuff without having to go to a premises, I think can really benefit. So, I mean, you may have extremely remote clients who can't travel an hour to go see a vet, and I think there's a great market for it. I know myself personally, I would be very interested in not having to physically drive half an hour to my vets with a dog who doesn't like going in the car. So I think that there's a market there, and I haven't seen many. So I think it would be, particularly from Melanie's perspective, it would probably be something great to look into because there aren't that many about.
Melanie, you've already mentioned that sort of creating space in that digital environment. So there's a question coming up at the moment, which is, you know, do I invest in an existing space or do I move? At least I think that's what the question is. But what you're saying is that one of the places you can move to is the digital world. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose, you know, traditionally we it's very important that we look at flow in the practice, and we need to think about a client's journey and our patient's journey. And that happens in two ways. So that's physical, so them actually taking that physical journey to the practice. But I think now we can explore that in a digital format, which I think is brilliant. So if it's a thing that you're really, really stuck for space, you're limited, you've maybe got 2 consult rooms, but you've got no way of expanding any further than that, well, then digital, I think, is a perfect place for you to start exploring, because digital now is taken out of the consult room. So maybe that you do have an extra vet on the premises, or a nurse that can utilize the digital or telemedicine. So that's taken it away. It doesn't have to be in a consult room. It can be, you know, you can start utilizing office space or creating these little like pods, which are like soundproof areas so that you can actually, be very professional about your communication on a digital platform. So you're not being interrupted or any loud noises or anything like that. So I think that's, that can be hugely utilized. And I mean, it's not even just necessarily consulting, it's where it leads on from there. And I mean, I've spoken to practices that are using it, and there's just so much. I mean, there's your follow-ups after operations and stuff. Say if you want to use post-operatively, or if you've done a set of x-rays with the client, you can actually use the digital platform to go through that case with the client. They can even pay, so it means that when they're actually coming back later on to pick up the animal, literally that's all they're doing. So I think there's lots of different ways it can be used and explored. Nurses as well, follow-up clinics. I'm personally passionate about fear-free as well. So I mean, if you've got a terrified animal that is just traumatized every time it comes into the clinic, well then, use your digital, you start looking at how we can actually help these animals. Even wound checks, like there's practices that are taken, because literally PetsApp is like WhatsApp for the clinics. So they can get the owners to take pictures of wounds and send it back to the practice. So there's just so many avenues to explore. I mean, I don't think we can cover it in the session tonight. There's just so much that can do. So I would be very excited about digital, but I think it's blended. It's blended. I mean, I know we have a lot of confines over here with, obviously we're in a different legal jurisdiction to the UK. So we're governed by the Veterinary Council of Ireland. So, telemedicine is being looked at the moment. So it's how we use it. I couldn't see any practices here just setting up and being purely just using telemedicine and nothing else at the moment. So I think it's a case of blended, definitely it's a case of blended, using the two, physical and digital.
Yeah, I mean, I think the expression that springs to my mind is bricks and clicks, which is the sort of, the retail of being online and also physically there. And what I notice is that the forward-thinking practices are achieving that, and they may well be achieving it in partnership with other enterprises that are offering that telemedicine service as a service. Yeah, fascinating times. You could reflect on.
And I think it's just being brave to explore them and start looking at them. And I think there's a lot more practices prepared to do that now. And I think the pandemic threw that up. I mean, it's excelled it really, because there was certainly a lot of practices wouldn't have considered it before. So I think the last year has probably shown practices, how they can start looking at and what's out there.
So there's a couple of questions here, which I'm going to declare a sort of conflict of interest and bias in, if you like. The first one is around, is there space for new independent practices, given that I think the question talks about the big six. What do the big six own in terms of a percentage of sites in terms of small animal? Is there still room for independence? And there's another question that was in here, so I'm struggling to find it now, which was about raising finance. So the question reads, raising sufficient finance is a concern for me to open a practice fully equipped and in a strong location. So I'm exploring the corporate partnership route. I may be wrong, but I think that opening a truly independent practice is now maybe a thing of the past for most vets. I'm going to declare my conflict of interest and say that as someone who sits at the heart of a thriving community of independent practices across the length and breadth of the UK, I'm going to declare that conflict and say I think there's absolutely the space for independent practices. But let me step back from that and ask for your objective opinions on that. And Simon, if you're happy to pick up on the finance bit, maybe that might be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is definitely space there for new independent practices. We've got numerous going through, whether that be completely new startup practices or people opening up additional branches of existing practices in new locations. And if you've got your service offering right and providing something that clients want, they've really thrived, and they're still growing in excess of our expectations, which is fantastic for them, but it proves that there is a strong market out there, and people want that level of service if that's what you can offer them. The finance is always a scary bit. There's no two ways about it. It's a major step for people because it's not cheap to open up a vet practice and have the level of equipment that you need in order to provide the service that you want to from clients from day one. There's various different ways of doing it, and the banks have been more cautious, I think it's fair to say, over the last 12 months with everything else that's been going on in the wider economy. But there's different options available as to how you do that in terms of taking on leased premises and to start with, and equipment finance, that you have a sort of a blended approach between different avenues of finance, rather than thinking it's going to cost me X £100,000 to start up, I'm never going to be able to get that money, and leaving the discussion there. Actually, there's other ways of dealing with it in order to manage the situation to make it feasible. It will require some investment from the people that are starting the practice, though, whether that be from cash that they've saved historically, family loans or investment that they can make, or even if it's just security over property that they may own and they've got some equity in. Any lenders for a new business will want some of that sort of involvement. So you've got some skin in the game, I think is what they like to say, and minimises their risk. So there is that is needed in order to get something going, but it shouldn't be the prohibitive factor without exploring it further in the first instance, just to make sure that all avenues are considered.
Thank you. Melanie, any sort of thoughts around that area?
Well, currently we've probably just got about just under 6% of practices here in Ireland are under corporates. And I mean, that is changing. There's no doubt that it's changing. And there's challenges, I suppose, for new vets that are looking to try and set up themselves, and finances as one of them, really. But there still is room. There definitely still is room for practices to set up from new or to be independent. Yeah, that's kind of our current position in Ireland at the moment.
Kate, any thoughts about the place for independent veterinary practice?
Yeah, so the majority of buyers that we act for are solely independent. We kind of don't buy for the corporates, and even on our sales, very few of them are to the corporates. It's kind of independent to independent. As kind of Simon was saying, the most common structure is that a buyer will take on an existing practice that the seller is wanting to release, and you do that via an asset sale or an asset purchase. So you're taking the equipment, you take the goodwill, so you take their kind of client basis, you take on their employees, any kind of property that they may have, but without the liabilities that you would take on if you were doing a share purchase. So you're kind of getting an existing business, but without as many of the liabilities as you would have if you were buying in with shares. And as Simon said, the most common scenario that we find is that, say you have a purchase price of $250, the buyers are able to put up, say, 25, 50 grand deposit, and the remainder may be done by a loan, and the bank secures that charge against their personal property, so their residential home. That's the most common structure. It's kind of the best way for buyers to get finance on a relatively short period of time without saving for years, whilst also kind of purchasing a business that they know they're not going to have to spend thousands on new equipment, and they're not going to have to find an entirely new client basis. And it's kind of a happy medium, I think, for buyers. But I definitely think there's room for independence, particularly when you have two independents grouping together, to kind of, even if they run as an expense sharing business where they share a property, but they run two kind of practices out of the one property, and they have the shared facilities. That's a really great way to kind of sidestep the finance issue, because then you've got two kind of people that a lender can secure their money against, which they're more happy to do, as opposed to just a sole person.
I think one of the observations I would make is that a consideration for the future for anyone, but particularly people at a younger age, is what's their pension going to be like in the future? And of course, this is a challenge at a societal level. And so one of the things I notice is that many of the people that are going to end up owning the big corporate veterinary practices are pension fund holders. desperate to invest in veterinary practice in order to be able to deliver a pension back to the people that have invested in the pension fund. Now, they're buying practices in order to be able to support pensions. As a vet, you can set up a practice, cut out the middleman, and invest in your pension and be really in control of it. So I wonder whether we can encourage everybody to look at the finances of setting up a practice with ambition and realizing that you're just simply cutting out the middleman to invest in the future. But your point, Simon, about the banks not being very helpful, I think is certainly a good case in point. And I think there are other ways that people can look for financial support. We're coming towards the end of our allotted hour, and I'm very conscious that you've probably got homes to turn to, not even to go to. We've got one participant, Andrew, who's got his hand up, and I'm not sure if he wanted to unmute and ask a question. But if you did, Andrew, then you're very welcome to do just that. It may be that you'd pressed on a hand up icon button without meaning to, and that's fine too. Ricky, I'm wondering if we could also bring up that last slide on the Mentimeter, if that's okay, which was to reassess people's confidence score. You can, thank you. So back onto Mentimeter, if you've still got that page live, and put in what score you might be giving now, to how confident you might be having listened to the thing, to our discussion this evening. So coming back to the panel, are there any further comments or final sort of concluding comments you'd like to make before we close this evening out?
I think kind of one thing that all of us have said is that when you are buying in or setting up your own practice, I think it's so easy to get caught up with the immediate big things that you think are the major elements. Whereas there's actually a lot of things which in your mind you may not have even considered, which are actually really crucial to a business. And I think it's best to remember that you don't have to go through this alone. It's so easy to kind of, drop a note to like Simon, your accountant, and say, I'm thinking of doing this. Do you think that's a sensible structure? Or, dropping a line to like myself as a lawyer and saying, I've got this document, but do I have everything? Like, is there anything else that I need? Or saying to Melanie, like, I'm just not sure about how I deal with X, Y, and Z. It's so easy to kind of just reach out. And, we've trained in our professions for so many years to deal with those specific issues, which, vets just don't encounter in their regular jobs. And I think a lot of people think, right, I'll deal with the big elements first. And then as the time progresses, they just put things aside and say, oh, I'll deal with that next month, or I'll deal with that next year. And then they become such a bigger issue than they mean to. But if you can engage people right at the beginning, you've then set up a relationship with an advisor who is qualified and knowledgeable in that particular element, who can then continue to support you and support your business as it grows and as it changes, so that you don't get those niggly things that you've forgotten about at the beginning. They don't crop up 2-3 years down the line. So I think it's so crucial to kind of just assess everything with your professional advisors right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it's some great point you're making there, Kate. And working with lots of new startup practices, we've actually developed a very simple checklist, which I'm very happy to provide to anyone who'd like it, which is just a long list of things have you thought about? And it ends up with a dustpan and brush right at the bottom. Melanie.
Yeah, there's a lot of help out there. There is actually a lot of help. And I've noticed this specifically over the last year as well. So when you are setting up, it's, I suppose, always kind of try and engage with other colleagues as well, because ultimately, if they've been through it, they're probably going to have seen things or come across things that you haven't thought about. But, engage with your local enterprise and boards and, because there is grants out there. So there's grants not only for like sustainable. So if you are doing a practice from scratch, or if you're trying to renovate a practice, there's grants available to help you do that. But also from a business perspective, you can get business mentors on board, and it's all done free through local authorities. and even like grants towards your digital side of your business and enhancing the digital side of your business. So it's just kind of having a look at those things as well, because they're a financial benefit to you. So yeah.
Excellent. That's some good advice there. Thank you. And Simon?
I think the big thing is for me to do as much preparation work before the doors open as possible, and that can be on looking at your finances and your cash flow projections, your marketing, your future plans as to where you want to go. It's always underestimated how much work there is involved in running your own business, as well as being the lead vet in that business as well. So the more you can do and get the systems and processes in place beforehand, the better. It gives you a much smoother ride through the process. And also, whilst you're doing that, is plan for the future rather than just for the coming 12 months. Actually have in your mind where you want to see the practice in 5-10 years time. Because if you've got that vision to start with, you might not be able to do it all from a space or a finance perspective, but you can actually make sure that you've got the right systems and processes in place to allow that to happen as the practice hopefully naturally grows over a period of time. Whereas trying to re-engineer those things into existing working arrangements after the event is a lot more upheaval for people. So just try and have that sort of slightly longer term view on the whole process, as well as what needs to happen today, tomorrow, the next 12 months.
Well, I would like to say a very big thank you to all of the panelists, to Kate and Melanie and Simon for your contributions this evening. I really appreciated them. It feels as though we've just scratched the surface, and that we've only really just got going. And maybe Lewis, you'll allow us a little bit of sort of extra podcast material at some stage. But a big thank you to you. Thank you to everybody that's joined us. My sincere apologies that we've not managed to live answer all the questions, but I think we'll be able to capture all the questions and answer them in a written form. Very happy to do that. Thank you to PetsApp for hosting the event. Lewis, much appreciated, and Ricky behind the scenes with all the tech, and really much appreciated for that. And I just wanted to perhaps leave people with just one thought, if I may, which is that shortly before the emergence of a global pandemic, if someone had come to me and said, there's going to be a global pandemic, and during that time, we're going to see loads of practices opening up, loads of new practices expanding and opening up, I'd have scratched my head and gone, really? Really? Well, the truth, I guess, is that a global pandemic is a truth. It's a real thing. There's no arguing it. It is reality. It's not some myth. And it's a real truth that's shone a light and opened up maybe some other real truths. And perhaps sometimes it's in those moments of discomfort that are really our key developments for us, or key stages in our development. So I hope that through all of this pain and suffering of the coronavirus pandemic, you've actually been able to sort of see the light more clearly on something that is a real truth. And that might be what you feel your purpose is, and it might be about how you see your future. And it may also be that you feel a little uncomfortable about that, or uncertain about that, or worried or anxious about it. Well, that's okay too, because that's a truth of being human. Absolutely fine. But the other truth of being human is that we are interconnected, absolutely interconnected. You've met three great people today who've got skills and ideas, experience and knowledge that can be part of that interconnection. There's a whole profession out there full of that knowledge and skills. And the vast majority that I've met in the last 35 years, only too happy to share what they've learned, especially the stuff they've learned the hard way. They love sharing that. So get connected. There's a world out there, and they would love to talk to you and support you for you to be the very best that you can be. We'll conclude there, I think, Lewis. Thank you so much indeed for everybody's time.
Thank you so much. Andrea, I'm ready to take up arms. That was truly fantastic. Thanks so much to our panelists. We'll make a recording available and send that out as soon as possible. And thanks very much. As always, if you'd like a demo or would like to chat to any of the panelists tonight, we're happy to link you up, as well as talk about PetsApp. thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks to all our panelists, and good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Here's your story, let's begin. The water's fine, come on, dive in. The future's here, it's right before your eyes. Step by step, you're on your way. You're welcome to a brighter day. Don't you know it feels good to be alive? You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could.